Hello, hi everyone. Welcome back to Woo Can Cook. My name is Wesley, and this is a show where we are slowly cooking our way through all of the food from my childhood. Today we're diving back into our series dedicated to deconstructing foods from Chinese American cuisine with a shot at yet another dish from the PF Chang's menu, which is their Singapore Street Noodles. Now, for those unfamiliar in this series, we have been taking apart classically Americanized dishes from Chinese American cuisine to identify their Americanized qualities and then reassemble them through the lens of more traditional Chinese wok cooking. This is, of course, very easy to do with really Americanized dishes like General Tso's chicken, which is essentially purely an American creation. Singapore noodles, on the other hand, have a very murky and kind of confusing origin. It is, for those unfamiliar, composed of a super thin vermicelli rice noodle that has been tossed in curry powder and then sautéed with a variety of veggies and proteins. Today we're going to be doing ours with the PF Chang's classic combination of sweet white onion, carrots, cabbage, chicken thigh, and shrimp. The origins of this dish, however, actually have nothing to do with Singapore at all, but in fact come from Cantonese-style Hong Kong eateries. This is why it looks more similar to a classic Chinese lo mein or chow mein rather than the dishes made in the Singapore Hawker Center where their legendary hawker street food is found. So, we're going to be employing a few classic Chinese stir-fry ingredients, largely drawing inspiration from our other chow mein and lo mein recipes, and then pairing that with a classic dry spice combination of curry powder, turmeric, and white pepper to give our noodles that iconic dark yellow color. Okay, so let's get into it. Alright, so diving right in, to me the biggest Americanized element of the PF Chang's version of this dish is the sheer massive volume of things that are in it. We Americans do love large portions, after all. So I'm gonna try and dial this back a little bit while also staying relatively true to the original here. Kicking things off first are our aromatic elements that come up in most of our Chinese recipes. This is 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic, followed by 1 inch or about 1 tablespoon of finely minced ginger, and then the whites of about 3 green onions, which I'm slicing thinly and setting aside for the initial aromatics of our wok fry. Then next, we're taking these leafy greens of our green onions, slicing them into planks, and then setting them aside for the veggie element of our stir fry later on. Now, iconically, the PF Chang's Singapore Street Noodle includes 4 other vegetables, which by the way is a lot of vegetables to jam into a stir fry. Those today are going to be diced red bell pepper in lieu of the PF Chang's cherry tomato, which are out of season right now, diced sweet white onion, julienned carrots, and finally some Taiwanese cabbage. Now, again, in our effort to just calm things down a little bit here, because that's a lot of stuff, I'm very intentionally using just half of my bell pepper and then half of my onion, and then following that with just a single medium carrot and a little less than a quarter of a cabbage head here. Our cabbage, by the way, is going to be the ingredient that we want to hold back the most or even just omit entirely, because this is mostly just a filler ingredient. Finally, last up, I'm de-stemming some cilantro here with a fork and then rolling the leaves up into a tight bunch so that we may chop it thinly for a finishing garnish. Next up, moving on to my proteins, this is 2 chicken thighs, which I'm slicing up very thinly. This is nearly a mince cut. Again, I think the smaller chop here is going to help us out quite a bit in our effort to reduce the noise of our final finished dish. We're tossing this in a quick marinade today with 4 tablespoons of soy sauce and 1 tablespoon of sesame oil to start, followed by a single tablespoon of hoisin sauce for some sugar, and finally rounding this out is half a teaspoon each of white pepper and cornstarch. Moving on to our shrimp here, I'm going with the frozen stuff since it's cost effective, and I also find that it freezes and defrosts really well. This is 6 of these bad boys that I'm removing the shell and tail from, then pulling out the poop vein of these things as well. That vein, by the way, is totally edible, so if you don't mind eating poop, go ahead and you do you. Last up, rounding things out, I'm whisking up a pair of eggs. Whoops. I'm whisking these up with a classic Chinese scrambled egg stir-fry combination of 1 tablespoon of Shaoxing wine and half a tablespoon of cornstarch, and then setting this all aside as we get to work on our sauce base next. Alright, so moving on to our sauce element here. This is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce to start, followed by 2 tablespoons of oyster sauce for a bit of malted richness, 1 tablespoon of Shaoxing wine for some brightness, and finally the ingredient that I'm fairly certain is not in the PF Chang's version, which is 1 tablespoon of Chinese doubanjiang for a bit of added heat. Next up is our vermicelli, which I'm rehydrating in boiling water for 2 minutes. This is 400 grams worth, or about 14 ounces. Yes, I know that sounds like an annoying number, but vermicelli is actually sold in grams, not ounces like dried pasta, which is why we're left with this weird uneven number of ounces. This stuff is also very delicate, so once it's tender, I'm immediately removing it from the water, then shocking it with cold water to halt that cooking process as well. Over on the stove, I've got my wok heating up as hot as possible, and then I'm adding 4 tablespoons of peanut oil and, as always, long yao for that nice non-stick surface. Then I'm dropping in my chicken here, doing my very best to hold back as much liquid as possible to reduce splatter. We're letting this sear for 2.5 minutes undisturbed to develop a nice crispy edge to our chicken before finally giving things a quick toss. Now, this is optional and mainly for show, but if you're trying to get that wok hei action for a smokier quality to your chicken, I'm tilting the wok to one side and letting that chicken fat catch on fire from the open flame, like so. Obviously, this only works on a gas range and also is a lot more effective on a high BTU wok burner where the flames kick up nice and high for you, but it does look cool, so just try not to drop any chicken. Anyway, I'm tossing this all for an additional minute, then adding my shrimp to the wok very briefly for a 10-second stir fry just to pick up a tiny little bit of color before immediately removing and setting aside. Shrimp overcooks very quickly, so be careful here. Next, I'm taking all of this glorious chicken fat and shrimp brine and then deglazing it with our sauce plus an additional 1/4 cup of water. This is also going to help us cook off some of those more abrasive qualities of our doubanjiang, which can be a little bit harsh without a bit of cook to it. Next up, I'm getting to my veggies here. You might notice that I'm doing several batch cooks today because, again, there are just so many things in our stir fry, and we want to try and keep our wok as hot as possible by minimizing the amount of things that are in it at any one given time. I'm doing one more long yao, then going in first are my aromatics. Here's my garlic, ginger, and the whites of my green onions, which I'm blooming for 15 seconds until nice and fragrant. Then going in next are my bell peppers, onions, and carrots, which I'm giving a solid 2-minute head start before dropping in my cabbage next. We want that cabbage to stay nice and crispy to give our dish a little bit of texture, so I'm giving this a toss for just 1 minute before removing this all from heat while we dive into our eggs next. Alright, so last up for our third and final batch cook here are our eggs and dry spices. I'm reheating my wok, then adding another 2 tablespoons of peanut oil, doing one more long yao, and then dropping in my eggs. Then I'm moving these all to one side once they're nice and scrambled, and clearing some surface area in the wok so that we may dry toast our spices next. This is 2 tablespoons of curry powder followed by an optional half tablespoon of turmeric. Curry powder, of course, contains turmeric already because it is a spice blend, but I like to add an extra pinch of it for a bit of added color if you've got some. We're toasting this on the wok surface for 10 seconds until nice and fragrant before dropping in our noodles next and giving a toss to incorporate. Then finally, at this point, we've more or less finished cooking everything already, so now we're just combining everything back into the wok to finish. Here's my shrimp and chicken going back in, followed by my veggies, and finally the leafy greens of my green onions. Then I'm adding my sauce element here, about a 1/4 cup at a time to taste, and giving everything one more toss to combine before removing everything from heat. Finally, last up, I'm finishing with my chopped cilantro garnish, and we're ready to eat. Alright, so I know we've done a fair share of Chinese noodle stir fries in this series already, which definitely lets a dish like this one fall right into my comfort zone for me, so I might be a little bit biased, but I'll say it anyway, I thought that this dish came out absolutely perfectly. Our noodles are soft and tender without turning out overcooked or mushy, as is often the case with vermicelli stir fries, and our shrimp timed out perfectly in its gentle cook, essentially just on residual heat. Then our curry powder is pervasive and aromatic for that really fragrant quality, which is absolutely iconic to this dish. And finally, I think the numerous steps that we took to reduce the noise in our stir fry paid off really well here and gave us a dish that is both protein rich and filling, but also not overwhelmingly in excess either. That said, I hope that the general takeaway here is that a traditional Singapore noodle like this one might contain 1 or 2 vegetables and maybe a single protein, if even that. So if you don't happen to have all of these ingredients on hand, you can absolutely omit some of these elements and you'll still end up with a really great stir fry. Okay, so that's it everyone. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you give this one a shot. For those who are new to the channel, this one is part of a larger series that we've been doing that's dedicated to reproducing classic Chinese American dishes, including a whole bunch of other stuff from the PF Chang's menu, so definitely check out that series next if you haven't yet, because there's a lot of these. For the Bay Area locals, the Wu Can Cook Fried Rice Pop-Up has a brand new residency every Friday at Federation Brewing in Oakland, so come by and say hi if you can. More about that at wucancook.com/eats. Finally, for those who have been watching for a while, make sure that you are also subscribed and hit the bell as well. Only about 30% of you all who are watching are actually subscribed, which if you're like me, there's a pretty good chance that you don't know that you're not subscribed, but it actually helps out quite a bit. As always, like, comment, subscribe, share, be nice humans, and I'll see you soon.